Steven Universe is a currently running Cartoon Network show with an average viewership of a little over 1 million per episode. It is currently on its 4th season, and has garnered a large and dedicated fanbase, pushing the show's success even further, and I would be remiss to say that this isn't earned. Steven Universe is indeed a rather quality show, featuring likable characters, great music, quality character design, and a dang good voice cast. However, this show has a number of flaws. They were small and ignorable when the show initially aired, but since have grown to be impossible not to notice. And so, I'm going to point them out in a video that I call Steven Universe Isn't As Good As Everyone Says It Is. I mean, it isn't bad or anything, but it's probably gonna hit a brick wall at some point, and I want to be the one who called it. AKA, the Steven Universe Rant. Disclaimer: I'm going to be very harsh and hyperbolic for the sake of entertainment. I do not wish ill on anyone who works on this show. I simply don't think they're very good at what they do. I shouldn't have to point out that I'm being hyperbolic, but since a very loud percentage of the Steven Universe fandom tends to misconstrue everything and interpret it as some sort of attack on them, I feel I should probably clarify this. Now then... Okay, that was an exaggeration. The composition is not bad. Bad composition would be something like the 2016 Berserk. Impossible to read, confusing, and overall unappealing. Steven Universe isn't this bad. I can tell what's going on just fine. It's perfectly functional, but there is a fundamental difference between being functional and being good, and Steven Universe composition is not by any stretch good. A truly great storyboard artist would know how to frame a shot in such a way that it's not only readable, but conveys a feeling. For example, let's look at an episode from my favorite cartoon, Motor City. Now, if you gave me a week, I might be able to list half the reasons why this show is so good, but let's stay on topic. In this episode, we're introduced to one of the series' recurring villains, a powerful gang leader with a rock star personality known as the Duke of Detroit. Note how the character is frequently shot from upward-facing angles to emphasize his larger-than-life ego. Keep that in mind. For the rest of this exchange, it seems like the director and storyboard artist wanted to keep this scene as interesting as possible by subtly reinforcing the Duke's personality, like this shot where the camera is gradually panning toward the Duke, as if drawn to him. Even when we get flat angles, the Duke is either looking down at the characters or looking away from them, as if they're so insignificant to him that they're not worth his attention. It builds a sort of motif around his character. Oh, and remember how he's shot from primarily upward-looking angles? Well, at the end of the episode, when the characters are able to best the Duke, we get this shot. Once again, an upward-looking shot, but this time the main character is also in the frame. He is now on the same level as the Duke. And indeed, right after this shot, the Duke declares that the main characters have proven they're worthy of his respect. Throughout this initial exchange, we get a number of interesting ways to show the characters talking to each other. Matter of fact, the only reverse shot we get is used to convey a joke, where every time the camera cuts back to the Duke, he's in a different supermodel pose. That's some mighty fine composition, if I do say so myself. Now that you know what great composition looks like, I bet that when you go back to Steven Universe, you'll realize just how dull this composition truly is. Nearly all of it is either completely flat angles or shot reverse shot.
Shot reverse shot. Shot reverse shot. Shot reverse shot. Shot reverse shot. Shot reverse shot. Shot reverse shot.
Like, so much shot reverse shot.
Shot reverse shot. Shot reverse shot. Shot reverse shot. Shot reverse shot. Shot reverse shot. Shot reverse shot.
Like, so much shot reverse shot.
Shot reverse shot. Shot reverse shot. Shot reverse shot. Shot reverse shot. Shot reverse shot. Shot reverse shot.
Like so.
Shot reverse shot. 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 Shot reverse shot.
You do realize that there are other ways to convey people talking to each other, right? Sometimes we get these experimental shots, which are kind of cool, but they're so few and far between that they actually become distracting. But I think the best example of this show's lack of effort toward composition is the "it's over, isn't it" scene. I'm sure that the first time you watched it, you thought that it was fine and dandy like the sweetest sour candy, but if you take a step back and ignore the pretty colors and beautiful music, you'll realize just how boring this scene really is. Remember that this is meant to be a major, pivotal moment in the show, and yet it's shot just like every other scene. Extremely flat, with a few close-ups and maybe an interesting shot here and there, but ones that go by so quick you won't even notice them. Heck, this part here where Pearl's on the balcony is conceptually a really good idea. She feels like an emotional wreck on the verge of falling into despair, so she's balancing on a thin glass balcony to show how close she is to that point. But since we're only ever given this angle, we never get the impression that she's actually gonna fall. All they had to do was shift the camera so we could see the edge of the building, and that would easily make the shot more interesting, but they couldn't even be bothered to do that. Just think about it. What emotions is this scene trying to invoke? Sadness, guilt, emptiness. Pearl is aware of how petty she's been about Rose, and she's frustrated that it's been so long and she still hasn't moved on, but she just can't. So how can we frame this scene to invoke these feelings? Wide shots. Lots of empty space. Maybe pull the camera far back to show how small Pearl feels. Have the camera looking downward at Pearl as she feels that Rose would look down on her at the state she's in. And these are just things I could think of off the top of my head. I bet if you put some time and, effort into the scene, you could come up with some even more amazing and emotional shots that I couldn't even think of. It really makes you think. For such a major moment in the show, they sure didn't try to make it feel like one, did they? And they do this constantly! Another thing that the Crewniverse seems to have no grasp of is how to create an engaging action scene. I'm sure they've seen good action scenes, just look at all these anime references! However, they clearly have no idea what makes those scenes good. But don't worry, I'm here. I have devised a specific science to creating a good action scene, and I call it the WEC rule. WEC is an acronym that stands for Weight, Environment, Composition, and Character. These are the 4 traits that you must have to make a good action scene. There are other things you can have, like music, color, and choreography, but that's the icing on the cake. It's not essential. These are what's essential. Allow me to elaborate. Weight stands for both the literal weight of the characters and the impact of their attacks. You can't just see it. You have to feel it. And there is a way to do this. First off, through the speed of the characters. Typically, heavy characters will move slowly and lighter characters will move faster. Makes sense, after all, the heavier something is, the harder it's gonna be to move. But did you know this can also be used to convey the power of an attack? If an attack goes by super fast, it's not going to register as much. Meanwhile, a slower moving attack will give you ample time to process what's going on. And that is how you create a feeling. Even if the attack is supposed to be going by fast in universe, you can use slow motion to give it that build-up. Other things you can use to create this feeling is environmental feedback. That is, showing what the attack does to both the person receiving it as well as the environment they're in order to show how powerful the attack is. For example, say you have one character swing at another. The other character is able to duck out of the way, causing the attacker to create a hole in the wall. That allows the viewer to see how powerful the attack was and can give off the feeling of, oh crap, it's a good thing that didn't hit me. Even if it's a weaker attack, you can still leave little scratches and grooves in the wall. When hitting the person, depending on how far they fly back, also helps to illustrate the power of an attack. The more recoil they get from the hit, the more powerful it was. Attacks can also cause items to be knocked around, create craters, make rocks and tiny items fly around, and you can't go wrong with big, billowy clouds of dust. And don't forget the timing! Timing is the most important aspect to creating a feeling of impact. To illustrate this, look at this little animation I made. If you have one person punch another and you use the exact same amount of frames for every part of the action, it's gonna look kinda weird. However, if you remove some frames from the end and add some frames to the beginning, bam! Are you feeling it now, Mr. Krabs? Finally, cement the scene with some editing tricks. If an attack is especially powerful, give the screen a little shake. Maybe add a flash on the screen when a character punches another if you have a lower budget, as this is a cheap but effective way of creating the feeling by causing the audience to flinch. And don't you dare forget that sound design! All those other aspects alone are great, but throw in some satisfying and well-timed sound effects and it puts the sequence on a whole new level.
There! I'm in! The pulse is online. The trigger should be up there next to you. Whoa! Woo! There! I'm in! The pulse is online. The trigger should be up there next to you. Whoa!
A great example of weight used in a fight scene is Spider-Man vs. Venom in The Spectacular Spider-Man. Note how, thanks to Spider-Man's smaller stature, he's able to dart around Venom and inflict more damage. Meanwhile, Venom, who is much larger, moves a bit slower but leaves a heavier impact with every punch, illustrated not only by showing Spidey fly backwards, but by adding a satisfying sound effect and shaking the screen ever so slightly. Next up is environment. Environment means to both set your characters in an interesting location and have them use and interact with it throughout the scene. For example, you could have two people fighting in an empty room, but let's try and be a little more creative here. Let's put the scene in, say, a grocery store. What can these characters do to each other while in a grocery store? They can throw food and other objects at each other, spill milk or juice on the floor to slip them up, maybe chase each other with shopping carts. There could be pedestrians that they have to deal with, either by holding hostage or trying to keep them out of the way, and that's just a few possibilities. And all of these make the scene immensely more entertaining than just punching each other in a room. And while you can have flat, non-interactive test of skill fights, those should be minimized to keep it from getting stale. And keep in mind that by interesting environment, I don't mean that you have to keep constantly blowing the audience's mind with crazy new and fantastical areas. You just need to put the characters in a non-linear environment with multiple things to interact with. A great example of environmental action scenes is, heck, pretty much all of the action scenes from the Dick Figures movie. You have the opening fight scene in a playground, bashing jungle gyms and climbing up slides, the harbor scene where they run from boat to boat using whatever equipment they come across to get away from the demon ninjas, or the chase scene in Paris where they're constantly weaving around traffic trying to avoid cops. Then there's composition, which I already talked about, so just keep in mind that visual clarity is very, very important in fight scenes. And finally, character. The need to understand the characters in the fight and who they are as people. When devising an action scene, you must always make sure to have the following questions in mind. What are these characters' skills? What are their personalities? And what is their goal in this scene? A good action scene will answer these questions without words. To elaborate, skills means both their superpowers and just their regular physical skills. For example, if you have a character that knows how to fly, then they're probably going to want to try to fly in a chase scene. And if you don't want him flying during your action scene, then you have to make sure that you give a reason as to why he can't. Otherwise, the audience will keep asking themselves, hey, why isn't he flying? What are their personalities is very important because it'll dictate how they act during the scene. If they're particularly hot-headed, then they might want to drop what they're doing and just fight whoever's after them. If they're super cowardly, then they're probably gonna want to run and hide or try to reason with the guy, basically just do whatever it takes to not have to fight. And you gotta keep these consistent too. For example, if the cowardly person decides to just drop everything and fight what's chasing them, well, that won't make a lot of sense to the audience, so you gotta give a motivation for it. And finally, what is their goal in this scene? Whether their goal is to obtain an item, to defeat the attacker, or to run away from someone chasing them, they are always going to be pursuing this goal during the scene. So again, if the character just stops doing whatever it takes to achieve the goal, well, the audience ain't gonna like that. So for example, if someone's chasing them and they're trying to get away, but then all of a sudden they stop and they see a coffee shop and they're like, oh man, I could really use a coffee, and then they go and they get one. I mean, if this is supposed to be like a kitschy comedy, then that's one thing, but if you want people to take the scene seriously, then it's gonna really ruin the tension by seeing them just stop what they're doing to have this funny joke. You'd be surprised how many movies do this. A good example of a character-driven action scene is this chase scene from Ratatouille. What are these characters' skills? Skinner doesn't have many outstanding skills. Remy is able to climb and run fast and fit into smaller spaces. What are their personalities? Skinner is somewhat crazy and determined to no end, using whatever means necessary to achieve his goal regardless of how ethical or legal they are. Remy is good-natured and wants very much to help out his friend and do what's right, and thanks to his upbringing is awfully resourceful. What is their goal in this scene? Skinner wants to catch Remy and get those papers back, and Remy wants to escape Skinner and get the papers to Linguini. And we see these answers illustrated masterfully in this scene, because let me tell you, if there's one guy who knows how to do a good action scene, it's Brad Bird. Now let's take a look at how Steven Universe handles these traits, minus composition since we've already talked about that. First, weight. Steven Universe fight scenes tend to be extremely floaty. It's never made clear just how heavy or strong these characters are, hits rarely have satisfying impacts, characters move too fast or too slow, and overall, you never really feel these fight scenes. As for environmental, Steven Universe fight scenes are almost always set in extremely flat areas with very little to interact with. Sometimes they throw rocks or something at each other, but that's it. One-on-one test of skill fights are fun and all, but not when that's all we ever get. So you're never gonna get a cool and inventive fight scene like this. Or this. Or even just cool, quick second moments like this. Just different places for people to punch each other in. Oh look, now they're punching each other in a green room. Oh, now they're punching each other in a blue room. Oh, now they're punching each other in a canyon. Wow. Are you starting to get what I'm saying here? I mean, you know you're fucked when even my mortal nemesis troll hunters did a better job at this. And character. In terms of character, Steven Universe gets it half right. Their personalities, goals, and motivations I'll check out. However, one thing the show constantly screws up is keeping track of the characters' abilities, strengths, and skills. Writers will constantly forget certain moves that the characters have set up, and this leads to numerous plot holes. The most famous example of this was the arc where Peridot was on the loose and the gems were trying to capture her. There's this one shot where Peridot's flying away, and during this scene I couldn't help but think, hey Pearl, you know how you shot lasers out of your staff that one episode? You want to try that? Hey Garnet, you know how you were able to shoot out your gauntlets like rockets in that one episode and in that official app game? Want to try that? Hey Amethyst, you know how you frequently integrate shape-shifting into both combat and everyday activities? How about you turn into a bird, fly above Peridot, and then turn into a bear and pile drive her into the ground? But it gets worse. Like, why can't Pearl summon her Hollow Pearls for use in combat? I'm gonna talk more about this later, but the lack of consistency in terms of characters' abilities turns boring fights into frustrating ones. But even then, at least some fights are fun through virtue of the characters. But one thing that Steven Universe screws up actively and regularly with no redeeming values is... This is one of the biggest and most recognizable flaws of Steven Universe. The fact that characters are frequently drawn off model with no consistent heights or proportions. Now right away, I want to dispel the argument that this was a stylistic choice. Stating that constantly drawing characters wrong is okay because it's a stylistic choice is like saying it's okay to draw your shitty anime characters with weird pant legs and arms constantly behind their backs because it's a stylistic choice. It's not something unique to be celebrated. It's lazy and it's unprofessional. I mean, for God's sakes, it is an animator's job to make sure that characters are constantly on model and proportional. These people aren't even doing what is required by their job. It'd be like if you hired a cameraman, but instead of bringing a professional grade camera to film the film with, it was just his shitty phone camera, but he still wanted to be paid the same amount as a regular film guy.
Give it all you got. Can't stop now, keep moving. Give it all you got. Give it all you got. Dance, 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 get on it, take it to the top.
This is the kind of stuff we constantly made fun of Sonic Underground and Korra Season 2 for, but here it's okay? No, it's fine, it's just a stylistic choice. It's super cool, it's stylistic, it highlights the imperfections in the world. There's nothing wrong here, it was just the style. They were being experimental this episode, you gotta give them credit for that. But what about Flapjack or Adventure Time? They do the same thing and it's fine there. Well, the reason why it works for these shows is because they're episodic comedies with a heavy emphasis on surrealism. So you could argue changing things around is part of the experience. Steven Universe did try surrealist humor once, and it was one of, if not the most universally hated episode in the entire series. Apart from that episode, Steven Universe is supposed to be a down-to-earth and plot-driven show. So the lack of consistency makes zero sense, serves no purpose, and can even be extremely distracting when watching a scene that's supposed to be taken seriously. What's even worse is that the lack of consistency isn't just in the visuals, it's everywhere. For example, in one episode, Amethyst implies that she's been to multiple human concerts and parties, and yet in a later episode, she's just as clueless as to how parties go as the other characters. Lapis seems to understand pretty well how TV and technology work, and yet when Peridot was Skyping with Steven, Lapis thought Steven was trapped in the iPad. Peridot can build attack drones and a gem drill, but she can't build herself new limb enhancers? Lapis is able to fight off all 3 of the crystal gems and Lion and hold up the entire ocean, all while sporting a cracked gem, and yet she can't fight off Jasper when the ocean is right there? She even fought off Jasper with no problems later on, but right here she can't? They can track Peridot with the use of her escape pod, but there isn't anything in the giant spaceship they crashed that could help them track Jasper? Garnet said in an episode that she couldn't tell Steven why he couldn't go to the walker because that would make him want to go more? What? 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 I'm pretty sure if you told Steven Blue Diamond was there, he'd be like, oh really? Then I won't go because I understand that this is very dangerous. Even if Garnet told Steven and he did still want to go, Garnet could give him future vision like she did 3 other times so that Steven would see the possible futures where everyone gets shattered or where Greg gets kidnapped, and then be like, okay, yeah, that's clearly not worth the risk. Problem solved. So let me get this straight. Jasper can survive being beaten into submission, thrown into a generator that then blows up, and an entire spaceship the size of Beach City crashing down on top of her. But when a sharp piece of metal stabs her, she poofs? Are you seriously telling me that the entire Malachite and Jasper arcs could have been avoided if just a little piece of shrapnel from the ship poked Jasper? Lars and Sadie's relationship is just, it's so poorly handled. Oh my god. It's like every time you see them again, they reset because every episode pertaining to their relationship is the exact same over and over again. Oh, Sadie needs to learn how to be honest about her feelings, and Lars needs to learn to open up and stop being a jerk. Wow, how interesting! Can't wait to see them learn that lesson again! Oh my god, my throat. Now, at this point, I bet you're wondering, hey, isn't there just one episode where the characters are consistently on model, the fight scenes are engaging, and the composition is well thought out? Well, yes, there is. Mindful Education is that episode. And you know why this episode looks so good all of a sudden? It's because they brought on Takafumi Hori as a guest animator. For those who don't know, Hori is a key animator working for Studio Trigger, who worked on projects such as Kill La Kill, Little Witch Academia, Summer Wars, and Space Patrol Luluco. Basically, he knows his stuff. And it shows. Just look at this episode. Wow! Amazing what this show can look like when it's being animated by someone who actually knows what they're doing, huh? And you know, I think I know the source of a lot of these problems too. And that problem is... Steven Universe wants really badly to have a story, but it's paced like an episodic comedy and plays out like one most of the time until suddenly a story element will ungracefully ram its way into the episode like the Kool-Aid Man. And that's one of the biggest issues here. A lot of these character inconsistencies I mentioned spawned from the writers wanting to make jokes without caring what they actually mean in the context of the characters, or in the context of what they've set up. This causes a lot of the characters to come across as really messed up. There's the famous We Kept Amethyst for one thing, but then there's also Sadie essentially trapping Lars and Steven on a deserted island just so she could spend some time with Lars, and Ronaldo constantly displaying near homicidal behavior. This isn't an over-the-top comedy like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. The show wants us to take these characters seriously and see them as people, but when you do that, they come off as extremely unsettling, to say the least. It's clear that most of the people working on the show are way more experienced at comedies and enjoy making those the most, but they also wanted to tell a story and have a bit of action. And if they wanted to, they could have had a fun action comedy along the same vein as Teen Titans or Motor City, with typically episodic and exaggerated adventures punctuated by overarching elements. However, instead they wanted episodes to play out super chill with mostly jokes, as well as have moments of extreme drama and angst. And that creates a sense of tonal dissonance the likes of which I have never seen before. It reminds me of when I'm writing a comic, and as I'm developing the story, I think up multiple key scenes and jokes that I want to make. The writers of the show probably do the same thing. However, instead of framing those jokes and scenes around the story, and maybe even removing ones that don't fit, they instead frame the story around the jokes and scenes, leaving a string of inconsistencies in their wake. So how should they fix this? Make the show script-driven. Instead of having a large team of storyboarders who all throw in their ideas regardless of if they work with each other or not, have a small team of writers who all have a unified idea of who the characters are as people and how the story should play out and what the overall tone should be. Oh, and also, they really need to get rid of... This leads to all of the later episodes devolving into boring, samey bullshit. Another episode of Steven screwing around in Beach City with some Randy. Another episode of Steven trying to have fun with a gem only to suddenly jump into dramatic character development. Another episode that has to contrive a reason for Steven to be able to see from someone else's perspective. It's boring! It's gotten to the point that if the show wants to have an episode even slightly unique and focus on someone else, they still have to shove Steven into the background, despite the fact that the episode would work just as fine, if not better, without him taking up screen time. I mean, just look at some fan favorites from other cartoons. Band Geeks, Root Beer Float Guy, Tales of Ba Sing Se. These episodes are so popular because they take a break from the usual protagonist and show other things happening in the world, expanding the universe and giving us a fun adventure we wouldn't have gotten from our usual main characters. Imagine how great it would be if we got episodes like that in Steven Universe. Maybe have an episode of Connie going back to school only to realize that she can't relate to her other friends anymore due to magical destiny stuff. Or an episode about Pearl having a date night with that mystery girl and finally understanding why rose quartz would fall for a human. Or heck, my favorite episode of The Simpsons is an episode called 22 Short Films About Springfield, where we continuously jump between loosely connected short stories starring the supporting cast. Imagine Steven Universe having an episode like that. It has the cast to pull it off, and I think everyone would enjoy seeing what other characters are up to during Steven's adventures. I understand that initiating a change like this would be kind of drastic, but the crew has technically already broken this rule by having episodes starring Stevani and Smoky Quartz, so why not just go for it? I think everyone would be into it. By sticking to the Steven-only perspective for so long, the crew has accomplished the opposite of what they set out to do. Instead of there being a living, breathing world just outside of Steven's perspective, It now seems as though nothing exists without Steven being there. It begs the question, if an event happens and Steven isn't there to witness it, does it really happen? Of course, this is a trick question, because, you see, Steven Universe is now on to its 4th season, and yet it feels as though nothing has really happened. Obviously, some things have happened. We found out about Homeworld, some new gems joined the party, there's even some nice character development. But nothing here has happened that couldn't have been accomplished in the 1st season. There's no main regular antagonist to create tension, there's no arc that doesn't end with everything returning to the past now! And worst of all, there's no character or story element that gets introduced that actually challenges the narrative and changes the way things play out. I mean, really think about it. Typically, when new characters are introduced, they serve some kind of purpose. They challenge the typical routine and bring out new traits in other characters. But in Steven Universe, when new characters are introduced, they do absolutely nothing. I'm sorry, Peridot. I will love you, always and forever, but you don't really contribute anything to the story apart from some comic relief. Another thing that Steven Universe has become known for is its tendency to subvert common tropes. And you know, there are times when I love this. Steven Universe will approach a trope that is typically insufferable and turn it on its head. And that's great! However, the show doesn't stop there. It feels the need to subvert everything, to the point where it almost gets a little insulting, like the Rising Tides Crashing Skies episode, which was clearly made as a prank on the fans. And at first, it was pretty funny. They set it up with both the title and episode description to make it seem like stuff was gonna go down, only for the episode to actually be a stupid documentary by Ronaldo. But the more the show drags on, the more insulting that episode becomes, like, ha ha, you thought there was gonna be a major change in the dynamics of the show, putting the characters in a new fun situation to overcome. Stupid! Steven Universe isn't like other shows where things happen. Steven Universe is subversive by being a show where nothing happens.
All right, tell me about the stories. What kind of stories?
Oh, no stories.
No stories? So what is it?
What did you do today?
I got up and came to work.
There's a show, that's a show.
How is that a show?
The biggest example of the show going nowhere despite massive changes was the cluster arc. Appropriately named, considering that the arc is a clusterfuck. Essentially, this arc is supposed to be about how there is a gigantic forced fusion incubating inside the Earth's crust that could awaken and destroy the entire world at any moment. Allow me to repeat. It could destroy the entire world! The planet that Rose died for and that the gems swore to protect at any moment! Undoing all of the strife that they went through in the Gem War and making Rose's sacrifice worth nothing! Hey! 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 You hear me? The world could be destroyed at any moment! Why is everyone so chill? Everyone could die at any moment, and yet the gems decide to, just take it easy, be chill and friendly. Heck, Peridot addresses this, and Steven's just like, hey man, you need to chill out. Shouldn't this arc be tense and challenging? This should be something that stresses the characters to no end, but instead it plays out like nothing's happening. It's almost like they knew that they would conveniently have enough time to build the drill before the cluster woke up. Like they read the script. What's that on the ground there? Is that the script?
Nothing happens on the show. It's just like life. You eat, you go shopping, you read, you eat, you read, you go shopping.
You read? You read on the show?
And the worst part is, once it's over, nothing has changed. It's just business as usual on Beach City. I know that the real purpose of this arc is for Peridot's redemption, but it shouldn't feel like that. And honestly, isn't it kind of frustrating to see the actual interesting conflict pushed to the side to go through the motions of the most predictable redemption arc ever? And then they even throw in other episodes that have nothing to do with the arc. Like, yeah, it's nice to see how Ruby and Sapphire met and to see the show address how Steven grows up, but don't you think you should have saved this till later? If they had something to do with the arc thematically, then maybe, but they don't. They're just there. They could have happened anywhere at any time, so why shove them in the middle of what is supposed to be a tense situation? Now, a really good show will have the stakes and dynamics shifting around constantly, but even average shows try to change things up once in a while.
No! Don't do it!
Why not? Give me one reason why I shouldn't finish this traitor once and for all!
Because he's one of us.
He's what?
I'm still a Kids Next Door operative. I always have been.
Like, I know this is really stupid, but when I was a kid, this was like the biggest plot twist ever. In fact, many shows will introduce some sort of major change in the 4th season to spice things up a little. Super Robot Monkey Team Hyperforce Go! Had the characters go into space to chase down an evil worm. The 2012 Ninja Turtles also had the characters go into space. Slugterra did something especially cool by making the 4th season its own self-contained story, taking place in a new location with a new villain and focusing on the arc of a new character, all of which are exclusive to that season. It was a fun break from the usual, and when it was over, I felt refreshed and ready for the next season. So, what has Steven Universe done in Season 4? Oh? Nothing? The show doesn't even have a main antagonist. And yeah, I know Yellow Diamond exists, but I mean someone who is set up early on and poses a regular threat to the characters, not someone who appears sometimes and we're supposed to be intimidated by, I guess. Instead, the show decides to push things forward by giving the audience as little information as possible, but promising that maybe, someday, something will actually happen. I mean, heck, you ever wonder why most people didn't start watching the show until Jailbreak? Yeah, a lot of you is gonna say because of the song, and I'm sure that that is a big contributing factor, but I believe the reason people didn't start watching until then is because Jailbreak was the first time we got any indication that the show was actually going somewhere. Although considering what I've been talking about with this video, that was probably a gigantic lie. I'm sure after watching this whole video, y'all are probably thinking, wow, Robo really hates this show. But that couldn't be any further from the truth. I love this show. It's one of the few shows that I actually take the time to keep up with. And the fact that I love it so much is why I'm so critical of it. I want the show to make good on its potential, and it has a lot of potential. The crew just needs to get their shit together and actually deliver on the promises they're setting up. And if anyone on the Crewniverse is watching this video, since I know y'all have quite an internet presence, I want you to know that I don't hate you. I don't even think you're as incompetent as I've been making you out to be in this video. That's mostly just for comedy's sake. Y'all are pretty talented. You've pulled off some really amazing things in the past, but you can't go with every single idea. You need to group up and really think about what you need to do to make the show quality. Stop thinking about your message. Stop thinking about how cool it is to be subversive. Stop thinking about appealing to your fans. Just think about what is the best way to go about telling this story, and go with that. I'm sure you can do it. But if that whole Rose didn't actually shatter Pink Diamond thing wasn't a red herring and is actually something that's going to be set up, then I am fucking bailing. Oh my god, I actually finished it! Holy fuck! I'm going to die soon, so before I transcend this mortal coil, allow me to give a big, special, amazing God-tier thank you to the Millen Tuner, who did some last-minute audio editing for me when I lost a bunch of footage and I thought I was gonna lose everything, but then he was like, yo, I'll help you out, cause he's a super cool guy. He has a lot of videos on Thomas the Train, and he just finished this special that he'd been working on, like, since I met him. So, you know, if you're into that stuff, I definitely recommend checking him out. Anyway, this video was voted on by my patrons! If you would like the ability to vote for future videos, then go on that Patreon page, please. We are now introducing the new $10 tier, which, along with everything you'd get from the previous tier, also allows you 5 entries into the commission raffle, a verbal thank you at the end of every video, and you, your character, or a character of your choice getting to be a background character during the animated segments of my reviews. Because I usually have animated segments, but I didn't this time, so that this video wouldn't kill me squared. Anyway, if you want to support the show outside of that, you can hit that subscribe and stuff, and my social media is in the description too. And okay, I think I'm dying now. Goodbye, everyone.